Hello, my friends. Thanks for being here. I'm Rachel Archelaus, founder of the Intuitive Art Academy. I'm here with our wonderful certification coach, Carrie Roldan.
Hey guys.
Carrie's actually a coach extraordinaire. She coaches business people, our graduates, cross-country athletes. I mean, she's kind of all over the place with this one in a beautiful way. And I think that means she's going to have a lot to say on this because how fast you think you are versus how fast you could be, I'm sure plays a big part in what your athletes are able to achieve. I know for me, self-perception, like what I think my story is, can limit or help me be unlimited. This is a big topic. I don't have any notes today because I just want to talk. I know Carrie's going to have a lot of really cool things to say, and you can probably put them in a frame that we're not used to hearing. So this topic isn't new to any of us. There are like story coaches. There are people who the only thing they do is help people with their story. So sit down, grab your tea or your coffee or your water, and let's just have a chat. I know I have both tea and water. And if you have any comments, you can put them in the chat, Facebook comment or YouTube, and we'll be able to see you. So thanks.
Yeah. So please, if you're here with us live, I think that we would definitely love your comments and your questions to help guide our conversation a little bit. So when Rachel messaged me last night, so how these lives generally work is Rachel comes up with the topic and then messages me sometime during the week to be like, oh, here's the topic here. Like, what do we think how do we want to approach it? But then we wind up showing up and approach it however is going to be approached that day is how it shows up. So when Rachel messaged me last night and she said, the topic is, what's your story? And then she's like, that's all I'm going to say. I was like, oh, that's perfect. Because there's so many different angles. Sorry, my hair is going to be a distraction for me today.
It looks really cute. I love it, Fluffy.
Thanks. Well, that's my story is I'm going to be distracted by my hair today. But there's so many different ways to approach this question. And it has been a theme, which Rachel didn't even know about, but it's been a total theme in my week this week with my business clients and with my athletes. So I don't think it's a new thing for people to have heard, what's the story you're telling yourself around that? Right? Is that maybe for you, Rachel? Like if in a coaching situation, when someone comes to me and says, well, this is happening and then that's happening and then whatever, that's a question that I often ask, right? What's the story you're telling yourself around that? But when I say that, like, how do you hear that, Rachel?
I hear that as in like, what's going through my head? What am I expecting to come from whatever's happening? Like, what's the story? What's the movie that's playing in my head about this?
Yeah. So, and you know what? I think it comes up like with therapists and like people who do like relationship counseling or whatever, when they have two people living in the same fight, and they'll ask, phone's ringing here. They'll ask, okay, let's imagine that Carrie and Rachel are having a disagreement. They'll be like, well, Rachel, when Carrie does this, what's the story you're telling yourself? And you're like, well, that she doesn't respect me or that she blah, blah, blah. And then they'll turn to Carrie, when you're doing it, like when Rachel says this, what's the story you're telling yourself? And often, right, it's very different stories in the same reality. And I find that fascinating. And that has been something that I didn't know where I was going to go with this, but I'm going to start with my athletic story, because I was talking to my friend on my run this morning, and I was telling her, did we already talk about this when I was a freshman in high school, how I was varsity and thought I was amazing?
No, go ahead. I like that.
Okay. So when I was a freshman in high school, I joined the cross country team. And this is a part of my story that is before that. I was a competitive gymnast, but I was, 5'7" as a freshman in high school, and it wasn't working out for me. And so I had this moment where I had a story that I told myself already that I'm a serious athlete, right? Like I had that story already going on, that I am strong, I'm flexible, I'm disciplined, I'm a serious athlete. And I thought in 8th grade, I was like, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to quit gymnastics. I literally, these were my two choices. And they're so funny now to think about. I was like, maybe I'll be a competitive weightlifter or maybe I'll be a distance runner. Like they couldn't be further from each other. But I joined the cross country team and I was unaware, one, really of my own talent. Like I just joined and was like, all right, we're running this fast. I'll hang on. Right. Like I had a story that I'm a hard worker. I had a story that, gymnastics had taught me, right, that practice makes perfect. But if you put in the work, right, if you just repetition and hard work pays off. So I had that story going on. So I joined this cross country team, and in cross country, top 7 are varsity. And in my high school, there were like 12 kids on the team. So I joined the cross country team and I thought it was a huge deal because I was a freshman on varsity. But now I look back and I'm like, I just had to be better than half. Like I had to be like literally average on that team. But in my mind, right, the story my coach was telling me, the story my parents were telling me, the story I was telling myself, it's like, this is a big deal. I'm impressive. I'm pretty darn good at this. If I'm this good as a freshman, imagine what can happen, right? And so I told myself a very positive story around that. And the next thing that happened, I promise this is all relevant somewhere. I was not just that I was in this good varsity team, but one of the people on my team happened to be one of the best runners in the state, actually 2 of them. That was something that I lucked into, right? But there was a story that they were telling themselves about the level of success, the level of expectation of success. So my first year on this team, they had maybe already been building something that I just stumbled into. But my first year, we achieved a level of success that hadn't been achieved in a while. So again, I have this story of like, oh, I'm part of a thing. I'm part of something that's successful. I'm in this machine. And we started telling ourselves the story, next year, we're going to win the state meet. It was actually the top girl. She'd been to the state meet by herself every year. And she was like, next year, I'm taking you guys with me. And we were like, well, as long as we're going, we might as well win. Right. So all year long, we started telling ourselves the story. We're going to state. We're going to win state. And long story short, we did. And I was just watching a video this week, and it was about another team that had done that, who had gone from the year before, my freshman year, we hadn't even made the state meet until winning it the next year. And it basically said it was like, this has never been done before. And I was like, yes, it has. I was there. I remember. But 2, it was like, this is crazy. This is the impossible. No team goes from obscurity to not even making the state meet to winning it in the next year. And I thought, well, that's just because of the story you tell yourself. Like we went in with a story of like, we're winners. We're going to win the state meet. And we did, because we didn't have another story. There was no doubt. We were honestly like, it wasn't a conscious choice not to pay attention to other teams. We literally were too naive to even know that there were like other teams as good as us. But that thing that happened when I was 15 years old, right, became the story of my athletic career, which was like, I can do anything, right? Like I can expect greatness because you just decide and do. And that then turned into this thing where I went into coaching high school athletes, and I had that expectation of like, well, it might take a year or 2, but I can take any team to the state meet, right? Like I know how to do this because that's my story, because I'm someone who knows how to do that. Do I really know how to do that? Maybe, but I know how to tell the story that we're doing it. And that has made all the difference, right? That has I just sent my cross country girls, and I got more to talk about with clients, but I just sent my cross country girls this little meme that said, like, if you hang around me long enough, I'll brainwash you into believing that you can do anything. And they were like, yeah, like, yes, that's so true. But what has been so fun in happening? So I have them fill out race plans, and they have been experiencing when I write down a timid story, when I write down, I want to run faster than, so I had one girl said, I want to run 3-mile race. I want to run faster than 1930. And I had another girl, the same ability level, like they're the same, say, I want to run 1850, I think. And so when they ran the race, the one who wanted to run 1850 ran 1856. And the one who wanted to run under 1930 ran 1927. And so I went back to them and was like, look, what's the story you're telling? And like, look, you said you wanted to run this and you did. And you said you wanted to run that and you did. So what story are you going to tell yourself next week? And next week they had much bigger goals. And that girl who just barely wanted to break 1930, 1 week later. So training wise, that's not that big of a difference. Like you're not going to make massive strides of an improvement in 1 week. But 1 week later, she ran 1836. And it was because she told herself a different story, right? She was willing to change her perspective on herself. So I'm going to stop talking because I think our people might not be just totally in love with all my running analogies. So what's landing with you, Rachel? What's landing in the chat? And where do you want to go from here?
Well, it's all landing. I mean, like, I wish we had 3 hours, because what you started with like the relationship counseling and stuff, I actually just decided last week that I'm not going to pay attention to anyone else's story about what's happening. Like, I'm not going to try to manage my perception. Like, one example is I have a friend who we've been friends for, I don't know, 10 years or so. You know, we don't see each other very often, but sometimes we'll catch up on Facebook. And I didn't get back to them after the last time they talked. We were going back a couple times, and then they said something, and then it was Thanksgiving, and I took like 5 days, and I was like, oh, let me go back to that conversation. And they had unfriended me because I waited too long to reply. And for them, I don't know if it was insecurity or they didn't think I was respecting them, or I don't know their story, but I was gonna like write them a letter and send it in the mail and be like, I'm so sorry. But it felt better to me to just like let it go. And, you know, not everything's going to be that dramatic in my life, but I just realized, like, I don't want to have to be on display so much. Like, if people get me, they get me. If they don't, they don't. And I think I'm in a place where I'm okay with that. And that felt like a really big milestone in everything. Like, the ability to be more free with people and to have more success and to have more people in my life. Because if we're talking business life, there's thousands and thousands of people that see me and make a judgment on me. And if I care about what they think of me, then I'll be so paralyzed I won't be able to grow. So that was really huge. And like, I don't care what your story is about me, because I'm comfortable with who I am. And I know I'm never coming from a bad place. But then with the running, I mean, yes. And I've done that with money very deliberately at times. Like, if someone hasn't signed up for a course of mine and it's like, 2 days beforehand, sometimes, and this would be too late, right? You can tell a story early on and then it'll work. But if I forgot to do that, and there was a little expectation of like, oh, people will be busy or they won't sign up, or that's my story somehow. And I realized that I can just decide in that moment and change it and believe that regardless of who signs up, it's the most profitable thing I've done. And it's amazing. And I'm in love with it. And we're going to show up and it's going to be great. And it doesn't matter who's there. It's going to be the best thing ever. And it kind of sounds like you're lying to yourself, but I make sure to not say anything that I don't feel is true. Like, I don't say there's going to be 10 people there and it's going to be great, or I'm going to make $100,000. I just go with what's true and just change the story, change the expectation. And without fail, every time I've managed to do that, it has worked. It has turned out. And so what you're saying about your expectations and believing them is incredible. And I think it's helpful to not look around too much, because if you did look around at those other teams and saw, oh gosh, well, they're running faster than me right now, and right, you would have lost a lot of that conviction. So keeping your eyes on yourself can be so helpful in allowing you to create what you want.
Well, and that's just it, right? Is our stories create. And I know that I had a client yesterday, and let me stop. What we are always doing is living out the story that we're telling ourselves, right? We're living out the story that we're telling ourselves, or we're living out the story that we're believing, right? It may not be the story we're telling ourselves, because the people who you and I work with, Rachel, we work with people who are deliberately choosing to live the story they want. And that's what you were talking about, right? Like, oh, what story do I need to write this apology? Like, like, I am going to live a different story, right? Which is live and let live. I am loving and open. And if this person wants to come back into my circle, but I'm not going to head down that story rabbit hole, because it doesn't serve me. Right. I think the challenge comes, and I don't know if there's anything in the comments, but I can feel the argument coming up, because I think we've all lived it for a really long time, right? We are subconscious. Our selves before we were 7 created lots of stories, created lots of truths. I once heard of, there's a word called truthiness. Do you know this, Rachel?
I think Stephen Colbert came up with truthiness in his show.
Okay, what is it exactly? Isn't it like not necessarily true, but the truthiness you tell yourself?
Yeah, it's kind of like what you're believing is the truth, but it's not the truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So we all have this subconscious that is speaking truthiness to us. It's like it has just decided to create a story around something. So, I have a memory of my grandpa being upset with me. I was playing with a dollhouse or something, and I don't know if I broke it or what, but he was like a kind, loving man, and he died when I was pretty young. I don't have very many memories of him, but one of the memories I have is when I was super young and he was upset because of what I did to the dollhouse. And I remember that it made me feel small and like I can't do things right. And like I should be afraid, right? But mostly like I can't trust myself. And then I remember another time I was in first grade and we were singing the alphabet song, and I got so excited. I was like so into like singing my ABCs, and I stood up on my desk and was like dancing out like W, X, Y, and Z. And I remember my teacher, who again was like kind and loving and thought I was like an amazing student, physically removing me from the desk, like kind of hard, like hands on my shoulders. Okay, I probably shouldn't have been standing on the desk, obviously, and was like upset with me, like the same way that my grandpa was. And it was that same thing of like, you can't trust your joy, Carrie, right? Like this. So that became a story that I told myself, right? It's not actually safe to follow my joy, to follow what makes me happy, right? So that led into, and this is just one of a million stories we all tell ourselves, right? But that was one for me that led me into a life of, gosh, if it feels free and fun and like that would be amazing to do, that's probably not appropriate. And Rachel knows, because you worked with me, Rachel, through that, when you're like, oh my God, stop trying to be appropriate. But that was a thing that came from a story that I didn't even know I was telling myself. And yet I was living it out in my life. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I just think like that's so common, so common. Yeah, I think a lot of us have that story of don't be too much, right? Like, don't speak until spoken to. You can't trust your joy, you know, and for so many reasons. As we get older, the story changes. Like, don't be too provocative, or like you'll get male attention, or whatever it happens to be. And, you know, I mean, I guess that brings me to one I've been really focusing on reframing for myself is the whole like, I own my body. I can do what I want with it. It doesn't, like, whatever anyone else thinks about it is irrelevant. You know, like that was a hard one for me. I developed really early. I went through puberty at 10. You know, I had boobs when no one else did. And it was really difficult for me. I got hit on by 20-year-olds all the time, and I was like 12. And I didn't know anything about it. At that time, it didn't bother me. I thought it was kind of fun, you know, but as I grew older, like people would call me like jail bait. And it was like, whoa, thinking about that now is insane. Like that you'd call a young woman that, you know? And so, I mean, I think we just internalize so many things and we don't realize it. You know, I didn't realize I was reacting. And so many of us, like we tell ourselves, I'm not good at business, or it's not okay to make money for this, and I think what you said about the fact that we don't know that we're living because of that is important, because we don't need to make ourselves wrong. You know, like the last thing that we need to be doing is feeling guilty about how we've lived, or like feeling like we missed out on something, because all of our power is in the now. And if we can manage to try to feel better and better, these things get illuminated and they get worked out. Like you found me and I helped you work that out, and you've worked out a lot of stuff on your own. And, you know, we can see it for, you know, for friends and stuff. So we don't have to go looking for them. They will come up as we try to improve our vibrational state, because that's really how we work all this stuff out. So I just want to say hi to Chantal and Shirley. Go ahead.
No, hi guys. And that is such a beautiful transition, right? Because what I was attempting to get to, but boy, do I love to tell a story, right? What I was attempting to get to was how you deliberately change your story, right? How you, one of the things that, if you listen to Abraham Hicks, right? Esther, or Abraham talks about when Esther was first sort of absorbing these teachings, and that she would always say, but it's true, right? But it's true. And it's like, and I actually think this is kind of a, I don't want to get all political, right? But right now in the United States, our political landscape is really divided, and there's very separate perceptions of truth based on the stories that we tell ourselves, right? Based on whatever subconscious story we grew up with, and how we're interpreting. Okay, I said I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do this. Or I want to talk about how you change your story. But I posted something on my Facebook page the other day that was that, I don't even know if it's an actual Albert Einstein quote. I think it is. But like the most important question you can ask yourself is whether or not you live in a friendly universe, which I interpret that as meaning, does the universe have my back, right? Or a hostile, friendly or hostile, I think he says. Like, so is the world basically good and supportive and etc.? Are you a glass half empty, or are you glass half full? And if before anyone says I'm a realist, I would say this moment in history shows us that there's no such thing, right? There's no such thing as a realist. Everything is perception. Reality is perception. And not to go all quantum physics on you, but like that's happened as well, right? Where we recognize this whole particle theory thing only exists when we're looking at it. It's true when we look for it, and different when we're not looking at it. So question is, how do we start living the story that we want to live? And stop arguing for our own limitations, because we are only limited by the stories we tell ourselves. And that may sound crazy, but we are only limited by the stories we tell ourselves. And for like you were saying the story that you told yourself around your body, that has been a challenge. For me, I have grown up in relative abundance with a scarcity story, like huge amount of scarcity story. I mean, huge amount, like, and I can now look back, right? Because I've deliberately changed that story. I have done a lot of the things that we teach in our group, Rachel, but I mean, maybe we can talk about calibration. But I deliberately worked on that story until I can sit now and recognize I went from, like, people used to say, did you have a past life in the Depression? Like, I mean, such a scarcity and like not wasting and penny pinching and there's never enough. And like, all of that, to where I am now, which is like, I am unlimited abundance. Like, anyways, that has taken some deliberate changing of story. And in order to change that story, it took looking for a new reality. It took, can I look at this through a different lens? Is it really true? Right? Like and anyways, I think that would be fun to talk about. So.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I want to say about changing your story is that whatever you're focusing on, you'll get more of. So that's why we don't want to deliberately look for these things, because we'll find them and we'll resonate with them and we'll move toward them and they'll get bigger. And the reason why we can't just stop believing these things right now, usually, is because, and I say usually because sometimes people have done the work and they don't realize, like, oh, I don't have that story anymore. But there's momentum, right? An object in motion stays in motion. If we have believed it before and have kind of picked it up along our lives, revisited it, then it will have some moving power. And that's why we can't be hard on ourselves if we can't just turn it off. So what we want to do, like Carrie said, is find a new place to look. What is my new story going to be? And make it something that's easier to find, easier to believe, because we don't want to then set up I'm a multimillionaire, and like, it's not going to feel resonant, more than likely. So something believable, something easy, something general, as Abraham would say. Like, it's okay for me to spend $20 a week on just whatever I'm mindlessly wanting. It's okay for me to go to the store and just pick out a shirt every week, and that's okay. It's okay for me to not save every penny that I make, because I am beginning to trust that things are okay and that more is always coming and that I live in a friendly universe. So having a newer direction to look, even if it's not like the opposite of what you were thinking before, is a really good start. And I think this is the hardest one for people. It's really doing your best to not explain yourself all the time, because that keeps picking up that old story and putting it in your now. And your now is where you can change things. Your now is where you can shift the momentum from that old story you don't want to the new story that you do want. And that's by, what are you talking about? What are you focusing on? Even if it's not a big shift, it really matters. So you don't need to bring up what happened to you. You don't need to refer to how you were or how you grew up, or, I think sometimes people, like, this becomes an identity thing, and you think that your past or your trauma or your whatever makes you unique and makes you special and makes you relatable and makes you whatever in the eyes of other people. You don't need to know what other people think of you. We already covered that, but I know that's hard to just turn off. it's not you. Whatever happened to you or whatever you absorbed about you is not you. You are a big, beautiful, incredible, unlimited, non-physical being who has temporarily projected yourself into this amazing planet and body. And you absolutely could never be defined by what you've absorbed in this world and what's happened to you. So I think this all goes back to taking ownership of you. You are you. You are unique and amazing and beautiful and talented and genius and all of that, regardless of what anyone has ever reflected back to you. That's not about you, it's about them. So maybe just deciding like, okay, I am going to define me. I'm going to see what I like. I'm going to refer to myself just by my own experience, by my own joy. I get to decide what my story is, and I can start fresh right here. Of course, there will be some momentum, but I can deal with that. I'm going to look where I want to look.
You just said something so important about whatever anybody has ever said about you, right? Projected onto you. It's not about you, it's about them. And it just occurred to me, I'm guessing this is true for you, Rachel. That's why people love working with me so much, right? Is because I am projecting onto them. Yeah, totally. You could do that. I believe in you because what I have the story that like, yeah, miracles happen every day. Of course you can do that. You were made for something amazing. Like, right? Like that is so easy for me to project onto somebody else because that's a huge part of my story. I just found that like, oh, people like working with me because I project my optimism onto them. And
yeah, well, you see people as their whole self because you see yourself as your whole unlimited self. Yeah, and that's so refreshing to people. You might be the only place they ever get that.
Well, so I know this is a different conversation, but I am understanding that more and more and more. That is like, oh, no one has ever told you this before, right? Like, are you kidding? No one ever told you could do this. No one ever told you were this amazing. That is something that I am realizing, right? But that's maybe that was something I was told. Who knows? But that is part of the story I tell myself is anybody can do anything they want. Anybody can do anything they want. So there we go on that. I want to about changing your story and about not focusing on, right? So I just gave this example of which by the way, I never put those two events from my past together until we were just having this conversation because I didn't have to look back at that stuff to be like, how come I feel this way, right? As I was moving up the scale, that stuff just found its way out, right? Because I chose to focus more on my growing sense of worthiness. And a deep understanding that if I can be loving and accepting of other people, then other people can be loving and accepting of me, right? It was that sort of work. But anyways, in terms of not being inappropriate or being too much. No, I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, changing your story. And a lot of times people will come to me and say, but this is how it's always been for me. But I had a client yesterday who she's exceptional. She's amazing. She is super multi-talented, multi-passionate. She's like so intelligent. She leads a team and I am like, I would love to be on her team, like to sit in a Zoom meeting that she's leading. Like, yeah, like I'm obviously all in for this woman. And she said basically the crux of what she got to is like, I'm a failure at everything. And I was like, what? And then she proceeded to give me, well, I got this vision board on my wall. I've had it there for 3 years and only one thing has ever freaking happened. And I've got like, and just went down this rabbit hole of like all the ways that she's an utter failure. And I think maybe that's what I'm asking is like, so obviously, well, a lot of the work I did with her was around, okay, let's look around. This failed. That failed, right? She's got a big failure story in her life right now. Are there things, have you ever done anything that didn't fail? Well, yeah, I did that one thing that, right? Like, and then anything else that you ever did that, how about, motherhood, how your kids doing? Yeah, well, my kids are like amazing people. And right. It was, well, I had to take her from everything I touch fails. I'm a disaster. I can't get anything right. I can never finish anything. I like that story to, and also like there was a little bit of, I used to be this way and now I'm a failure kind of thing, to slowly, incrementally working up her vibrational scale until she was like, oh, yeah, that one thing failed. But all these other things are going so well. And I'm so good at this. And I'm really passionate about that. And it like led in a completely different direction. So what I'm saying is, you don't have to look at your story to change it. But when it arises, how do you get out of it? When you're looking around and all you can see is your story. And that's how, I mean, when I'm working with people, that's the work I'm doing. I know that's the work that you're doing, Rachel. But I don't know if that's the best advice I can give, besides just change the subject.
Yeah, challenge it. What is really the truth? That's often the first place I go with people. If we're in a session and they say, I don't know, it's hard to make things up, so I'm not sure. But if they say like, oh, I could never, I don't know, what Carrie just said. But you just want to ask yourself, is that even true? Is that even true? And usually it's no. Because these negative stories, they're just from so long ago, or it's something someone else reflected to you that isn't even your truth. So challenge it. What even is the truth here? And then calibrate, like Carrie was saying. But, sometimes calibrating can just make it worse. So you want to make sure that you're in a place where you can move vibrationally, you can move feeling wise. If you're down in the depths of despair, don't bring up the thing that got you there, right? Like Carrie said, change the subject, watch something silly on YouTube, go for a walk. When you're starting to feel a little bit better, that's the place to move yourself up. Like, oh, you know what? That's not even really true. I just kind of picked that up along the way. Or I've never even tried to have a business, so I don't know that I can't do it. Or, you know what? I would really like to charge for that. I really feel like I can do great work and it would be really fun. So I'm going to give it a go. Like, positive self-talk is so worthwhile, because that's how you move that momentum into a place where it's working for you. You want your story to be positive and you want it to move you in a direction that is pleasing and life enhancing. And you have every right to have the life that you desire. And that's often where we need to stop looking around us, because if you right now are in a place where most of the people don't like their life, or they're just complaining all the time, which is kind of like our national pastime, well, being around those people, it's not really going to help you very much. So you don't need to cut everyone out of your life, but just start to be aware of what you're walking into. You're walking into their story when you start talking to them. So you can start to say, oh, hey, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about something fun. Like, what do you really want to do? And I remember going through that process of like kind of retraining my friends And it was great. It really happened, but you have to be the one that takes charge. So be the dominant vibration in the room. Decide that you're going to feel better no matter what. And just as much as you can, bring yourself to everything. Bring yourself to your business and your relationship and your life, because everything will get better if you've decided that you're telling your own story now.
I think that is so, so, so powerful about the be the dominant vibration in the room, and be very protective of the story that you're telling yourself. So, like, I remember when I started to tell myself this story about, you know, how abundant I was and the reality that I was living in, like, it was a fantasy. I was living internally and in my little vibrational bubble, a very different story than what was being lived by the other people in my household, the other people in my family, a lot of the people who I hung out with on the day to day. And I just wouldn't go there. I just wouldn't go there. And initially, I probably wasn't the dominant vibration in the room, but I could leave the room, right? Or I could change the subject. Or I could, like, I'll be honest, in my marriage, when there was like money fights, right? I could just ignore. I could be like, I'm not having this conversation right now. Right? Like, we'll talk about it later when it's not so emotionally charged. And what would wind up happening is I was working on my own vibration and my own stuff. My husband, because I wasn't interacting with his like monster story that was going on, right? Because I refused to interact with that story at all. The story, because like for like the question that would come up all the time of like, how are we going to pay for this? And I would be like, I'm just not going to have that conversation right now. I don't know right now, but we're not talking about it right now. Like, I'm not having this conversation, because what it would be is like, we got this expense and that expense, and where's the money going to come from? And and I would just be like, I don't know, I'm out. Like, and that seems like, maybe it seemed unloving to him, right? Maybe it seemed like she just doesn't care, or she doesn't give a crap. I don't know, because I was too busy. And by the way, we're happily married. Everything's wonderful. But I was too busy protecting the story of everything's working out. There's plenty. The universe has my back. It's right. I was protecting that. And so I would go away and I would breathe or meditate or go on a run or go talk to somebody who was going to fill me up. And by the time we got back, we never actually had to have the where's the money going to come from conversation, because by the time that I would like re-enter that space with my husband, he'd be like, oh, good news. Like, it was fine. And so I think that is important, right? As I continued to protect the changing of my money story, our money story changed, because I did become, by leaving the room, I eventually learned how to be the dominant vibration in the room. I learned how to not get triggered and not freak out and not, right, but just relax into the truth of the new story that I was telling. Sort of long about other people's stories. Like,
oh, that's so good. Yeah.
Living in we can see it's so easy. I talk to my kids about this a lot. Like, we don't need to enact with other people's crazy, right? Like, interact. We don't, like, you can honor their crazy. You can see they're in it. They are attached to that level of crazy. And I'm using crazy loosely, right? It's whatever attachment they have to their story. Like, you can just love them and be equally attached to your level of awesome, right? What story do you want to live? Ultimately, that's like back to the friendly universe thing. I have an uncle who commented on that and was like, well, unfortunately, our country has always been blah, blah, blah. And he like got on this, like, it's always been hostile. There's always been wars and there's blah, 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 blah. And he was like, and I was like, bummer for him. Like, bummer. I don't want to live in your reality. I sound totally Spicoli right now, but like, I don't want to live in that reality. I get to choose. And we all get to choose. And I think that's the thing is we think that we only get to choose some of the stories that we tell ourselves, right? We think that like there's some things that, yeah, positive attitude works, but there's other things that just are. And I just want to challenge that. I really want to challenge that because that's just our own limitations.
I mean, especially about, I think people get held back about their partners. Like, oh, that's great, but my partner would never go for it, or they don't believe in this, or this has been one of the biggest things I've seen in my friends in my coaching practice. Like, and when the person is okay with what they're doing, and finally, after a long time of like hiding it and like shutting down when the other person's there, they just share openly, it's usually met with a lot of curiosity and a lot of excitement and a lot of support. Even in those people who they thought my husband would never go for that, ever, ever, ever. They're totally not into that. When they were adamant about it, it always, I can't think of one situation that didn't turn out right. And it's so powerful to know that you don't have to give anything up by being yourself, by changing your story. You know, I mean, sure, once in a while, somebody might leave your world, but it's usually not going to be the people that you care the most about. So, and of course, I just thought of like, well, what about the LGBTQ teen that comes out to their parent? Sure, once in a while that happens. But I think, you know, we sign up for what we sign up for on purpose. We know what we're getting into when we come into this life. And now I'm going pre-birth on you, but like, we really do have the power to live the life that we want to live now. We're here now. How do we want to live? Who do we want to be? Intimate Alien wrote something a couple months ago, and the title of it was, you can be who you'll let yourself be. Who will you let yourself be? I think sometimes we have a really closed off version of who we are. And I find that as I keep expanding in life and I keep just going into love, just going into joy, just going into love, just going into joy, but I find I'm interested in things I never would have let myself go for before. One of which is nail polish. I always thought, oh, it's too toxic. I can't deal with that. But it's beautiful and it brings me so much joy. Screenwriting, like my life just keeps getting bigger and fuller and more abundant and loving. And there are just so many things I wouldn't have let myself go to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if I had stayed in that small little box I'd made for myself. So you are going to keep expanding. You don't even maybe know who you're going to be next year, 3 years, and 5 years. And isn't that exciting? Life is never ending. And we have prepared such a smorgasbord of things for us to explore here.
You made me yawn, Rachel.
For those of you who are new here, that's a good thing from Carrie.
Yes, she's not boring me. No. Yeah. I don't have anything to add, actually. I think I just have a call to action for you guys who are watching, right? Which is, if this conversation is sparking something in you, right? This like, I want to live a bigger story. I want to live a more joyful story. I want to live, for the longest time, I just wanted more ease in my story. Like I had a story, right? You heard me talk about being a young athlete and hardworking. And like, I had a lot of that story. And I was like, could I do all this with more ease, with the same amount of passion, but less hard? Like, right. And I just want to say that if this has inspired something, sparked something in you of like, I'm ready to live the story that, you know, it's interesting because we talk about story, right? Which story is like a framework of words basically around something. But sometimes the story you want to live doesn't have words yet. Yesterday, Rachel and I were on a coaching call and we were talking about living into our dreams, right? And dreaming things into reality. And one of our group members was like, before my dream, before I can describe it, it has a feeling and an energy in it. She was, I'm going to cough. Excuse me. She was just talking about, she was describing what I perceived as like this kind of amoeba light energy ball that had this feeling. And so she couldn't even describe her dream yet. She couldn't even create a story around her dream yet. She could just sort of feel into that. And so as we're having this conversation, if at any point of this you've kind of felt something something new emerge in you, I think I just want to encourage you to follow that, to lean into that feeling, to allow that feeling, to not rush to put a story around it, to allow that feeling to grow in you, and to look at that with curiosity, right? Like, what is that? What is this? Because as you do that, a new story will emerge, right? Rachel's saying, as I lean more into love, I'm in screenwriting now. I'm in, right? Like who,
and
she
let
didn't.
me just say that like I grew up openly psychic, and the first things about psychics that were like in the mainstream were, it's like they were a joke, right? Like there was Miss Cleo, and like they found out she was, I don't know, fraud or something, but it wasn't very pleasant, and it wasn't something you wanted to call yourself in public, you know, like I was definitely bullied and all kinds of stuff, but I adamantly knew I never wanted to go into entertainment. I never want people to think I'm an entertainer. It was like never in my life, right? So for me to now be writing movies and shows and even be on YouTube, and to have Intimate Alien, who has a very big performance quality to her, if I had let that define me, if I had held on to that thought, I wouldn't be living this rich part of my life right now.
That's so good. That's like, because you're living that. Yeah. Anyways, we're all doing that. We are all living out the stories that we tell ourselves. And I think my encouragement to everyone in this is, if you've been living the same story for a really long time, like Rachel's saying, because you've created an identity around it, that's just who I am, or that's just how it is for me. I'm remembering what Abraham always says. It was just like a thought, or a belief is just a thought you keep on thinking. Like that hit me so strongly, like, oh, because we hold on to our beliefs like they're true, right? But there's just a thought we keep on thinking. So what if I started to keep on thinking something that I wanted to be true? What if I just, like, that'd be rad. Let's do that. And so I just want to encourage you, like, it's never too late to change a story. It's never too late to change a story. I mean, we know. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to share. We have Joy saying, I love it.
Yay.
We love it too. Yay.
Yeah. Like we know people, right? Who we have a friend who in her, I think she's in her 60s, suddenly stopped needing glasses because she told herself a new story. That's amazing, right? She had a whole story of like, I got bad eyes. My eyesight isn't good. Like, whatever. And then in her 60s decided, what if I decided that wasn't true? Yeah. So that's the good stuff, right? That's the stuff. That's where we want to live and play. And that's what Rachel and I was telling Rachel the other day, like, when I get stuck in, sometimes I feel anxiety, or like I put pressure on myself to continue to dream bigger and bigger and bigger dreams. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know what's bigger than this. Like I'll get stuck in that. And one of the things that really helps me is to look around and notice what is here now that was once a dream. What is here in my now that was once a story I wanted to be true. And like I am living so many stories that I once wanted to be true, that were like, well, yeah, good luck with that. That I just kept telling myself it could be until it was. So, yeah.
That, and sometimes I'll think like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, and then I realize like, oh, wait a minute, I already have that. Like, oh, wait, I already did that. And that happens to me way more than you would think, because I am an appreciator. Like all day long, I'm appreciating. And then I realize, oh, wait, that thing I just asked for? Oh, yeah, I already have it. So it's what we perceive feels like our truth, but we can perceive something else and also have it be our truth.
Well, you and I were both talking in the last aligned up level how we wanted to travel by private jet, right? Like that is when Rachel said, wouldn't it be nice if, that is one of my, wouldn't it be nice if. Wouldn't it be nice if when I wanted to go on vacation, I could just like call up the jet and be like, hey, and go there. And while I haven't yet looked into it because I am not in a place where my family is traveling right now, I was telling Rachel the story about how that actually happened for my mom. Like she accidentally booked herself she thought it wasn't super expensive. She thought she was booking herself on like a regular flight, but it was like this total semi-private, like tiny Learjet type situation. And I just thought, that's something, the story that I tell myself around that is like, wouldn't it be nice if, and that's totally not that accessible. But if Rachel sat down with me and said, but is that really true? Right? Do an internet search. Is it really not that accessible? Like I'm betting what I would find out is like,
like, have you ever even looked?
No, I have never even looked.
Yeah.
So anyways, hey, if you guys want to hang out in the energy that we are creating all the time, come join us in the multi-dimensional abundance coaching group because it's rad over there.
Yeah, it really is. We just get to be this more, and you get a built-in community and all kinds of fun things. So if you want to look at it, go to intuitiveart.com/membership. intuitiveart.com/membership. Okay. Well, Carrie, this was so much fun. I really, really enjoyed this topic. We went to so many places, and yeah, I mean, if you guys think Carrie and I should do a podcast or we should do this every week, let me know because I'm kind of feeling it.
Hey, I wrote podcast on my things to do this month, and it's the things that I, want to, whatever it is. And it's the only thing this month that hasn't yet come to pass. So the fact that you just brought that up, not a coincidence.
Well, Joyce said totally with like 5 exclamation points. So I say, your wish has been manifested, Carrie.
Well, there it is. So proof that when you write it down, when you start telling yourself the story, it happens pretty fast.
Yep. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We really love spending time with you, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, guys.
Have a great day.